and to reach out a social justice broadcast, as we've been doing every Saturday. And man, I saw a banner back from when we first started back 6 years ago. You remember the one where the heads were floating on the vertical, and we kind of
Uh,
look like
God.
cartoons.
Oh my.
No, I'm like,
We've
I
been
don't
doing this six
know.
years.
We looked about the same age. We're coming up on it at the very least, right?
Yeah, I know I'm older, but 6 years. I'm surprised that it's been that long.
Yeah, I mean, your hair is still white, so negligibly,
Well, yeah, well,
like,
yeah.
it's
Actually,
identical.
it's probably whiter.
Then? You think it was whiter
Maybe.
then? Yeah, that could be.
I think it's whiter now. I think it's. There used to be a black streak here and there, or a gray streak here and there, but now it seems to be all white. I'm going to look like my grandfather.
Well, it's not a bad thing.
No, I always was impressed with the whiteness of his hair. You know, our literary reference is Uncle Remus. He had that white hair. Good guy, smart guy.
I wasn't familiar with Uncle Remus till you mentioned him that day, and then I looked him up. Wow, okay.
Yeah, he's the one that gives us all the morals, the morals. The moral of that story is, don't be a glutton. Talk about Wakanasi, the spider.
That was really interesting. I finally got to reading 5,000 years of. No, I always get this wrong. Debt, the first 5,000 years. And man, it's a good one.
Mm.
It is an excellent book. And it really did speak of how people wove their sense of ethics, or the ethics they wanted their people to believe, into their currency, into their monetary system and their value.
Uh huh. Hmm.
And you
Yeah.
see it so intertwined with the fabric of cultures that even, I think the Mesopotamians had this really harsh system of debt, and it was very, like, they would, the person to whom you owed money could come and just start taking your things. They could start taking your things of value,
Yeah.
your livestock, your
They could take
implements,
you.
and yeah, your
They could
family,
take
and
you or
then
take your wife
eventually
or
you.
your kids.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah.
And eventually, in
That's
bad economic
but
times, it got so bad as, I don't know, like the whole country was just tearing itself apart.
I mean, it's coming down to the way we come down to it, the way we treat that, and you come and get the same results. And what they learned a long time ago is that these results are not good, and we have to do something about it. And since debt is not an immutable law of nature, since it's something that we made up as a part of our system, our systematic way of running our communities, we can do something about it. And what he did was, and they did often, was forgive debt. The Sumerians and all of them, they called it Jubilee. Every once in a while, they would forgive debt. I mean, if you were in business and you business to business, that's on you. But in terms of being an average guy, a consumer, a peon, a person, you know, our debts were forgiven, and we were. They used the word. I see this quote that you have here: free. Uh,
And I do recommend this book. It's a long one, but it's available for free by PDF. Just David Graeber's Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And like they were saying, like, this was a culture where the temple system and the rulers had absolute authority. So that made it easier to just do it, I guess. But the kings just announced amnesties, clean slates of debt, just wiping consumer debt null and void. Interestingly, allowing commercial debts to remain, which in and of itself is pretty revolutionary. They let the consumer debt uh, just evaporate and then keep the commercial debts. Interestingly, pretty much the direct inverse of how we roll now.
And those people who were in slavery, basically economic peonage, they were allowed to go free. Not only were they allowed to go free, but they were given some means and whereabouts that they could go and survive for a certain period of time on the resources they took with them. You know, every 7 years, for example, in some places, you would free your slaves, the ones who were there because of these economic reasons, the ones who you went and enslaved or peonaged, because they owed you something, money, more than anything else. But we've come here again. I mean, we've gotten away from this thing of debt forgiveness. We've gotten to the point where we believe that it's all moral, that you owing money is immoral, that the person collecting the money is acting morally. you know, it's all moral. If you owe me, you're immoral, man.
And really, though, was that not also just a scam from the start in order to consolidate resources at the top or wherever they wanted them as well?
It always has been. I mean, the tendency of people with money is to consolidate the money in such a way that it brings back more money, so that we move from actual productive to actual a finance economy, from a productive economy to a finance economy. An economy that's based only on the finance aspect of it, but no really production is necessary. So ultimately, we're going to end up with just a real debt culture, because if you're going to continue to run a culture like that, you can never forgive debt.
It just keeps getting passed on from person to person to institution. At some point, your home mortgage is owned by a hedge fund who likes taking risky gambles on GameStop. And then, hey, oh, your mortgage rate just went up by about 1,000%. I understand that's not how mortgages work, and I'm mostly just, talking here. But it means that you have no consent as to where your debt remains. Like, it does not have to remain in the hands of the person that it originated, with whom you originated it.
No, they sell debt. Debt is a commodity. You know, Debt is a line of wealth for a bank. You know, Debt is a commodity. Debt is something to be traded. That is something to be bought. You know, you can bundle up all your debts and sell them to me, and I'll buy them, and I'll take the risk of collecting, because the rewards are so great. But it comes back again and again to the same thing, and that we are a dead economy, and it will be not only, you talk about individuals, but the country can go bankrupt. The country can be so indebted, and that it pays the what it costs to simply administer the debt, and administering that debt itself will break us and not pay on the principal. You know, that's the kind of situation that we find ourselves in now. And if we're not going to be fluid enough in terms of our own creative economics and our own communities, we're going down with this moral, you know,
Yeah,
uh, austerity.
austerity. Yeah, and in the book, he also spoke of other systems where this really originated, saying that these sorts of market games, these sorts of markets are new. They're not some new invention. The system of credit has existed since money has existed in some form or another. Actually, before, he posits that that came first, actually. And that in many of the other times, the safeguards were pointed towards ensuring that creditors were not as vulture such vulture capitalists in their doings, that they didn't try to just pass bad debts, or that there were safeguards in place for consumers. And we're going the other way.
Well, yeah, yeah. I don't even think we use the term usury anymore. I don't think that's a thing anymore.
That's just Monday.
Whatever it is that, right?
That's
You
just a
know,
day at work for them.
yeah. But we can actually, suffer this unto death. I mean, what I'm saying is, as a nation, as our kids come on board, as our grandkids come on board, that they will come into already a debt-ridden community, a debt-ridden country. You know, that the longer this goes on, the less chance our prodigy will have of being able to do anything except that they come to the conclusion that this is man-made and we can change it. We can forgive it. We forgave so much of our debt after World War II. I would recommend, you're talking about books, the book Forgive Us Our Debts. Forgive Us Our Debts. He tells us, among other things, in that book, that Jesus didn't die on the cross for our sins. He died on the cross for our debts. The biggest
Interesting
argument,
crossover and equivalence, or perhaps false equivalence there.
well, the rabbis, the argument, the fight that he had with the rabbis was about this very thing we're talking about. The rabbis were getting away from Jubilee because the rabbi was interested in being money changers. This is what the whole, when he got angry and overturned the tables and all that, it was about the money changers. You know, he mentions debt, he mentions money more than he mentions love in the New Testament. You know, money. What analogy do you want to use? The camel and the eye of the needle? You know,
Sure.
what does it
Yeah.
take to
Hey.
inform you of the results of money? It takes uh, war. You go out and you sell, you get rid of all your debt, and then you come back and deal with me. That's what he told one rich man. And that was his sense of morality. But now, when we get to the era of conspicuous consumption and all that kind of thing, these people declared that they were rich, conspicuously rich, over and above what in any way is rational, is necessary. And doing
And
that, they said that they were given this position by God. And they
yeah,
convinced us. They convinced us that they were rewarded by God.
it's Calvinism run amok,
Yeah.
predestination in a fancy capitalistic sense. And I think in that era of conspicuous consumption, undoubtedly there have been many, many, but the one you're speaking, like the 20s
Hmm.
especially, or from, before the crash.
The late 1800s to the
Yeah.
20s.
Um, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies. You ever visit Newport, Rhode Island? Seen some of those
No,
monstrosities?
no, I
It's
didn't. I didn't.
it's pretty disgusting. Um, but no, they no, it'd be a great place for about 30 people to live. If 30 people could live in
Mm.
that place, cool,
Uh-huh.
but not for a few people. Anyway, though, we're speaking of when people are flaunting their wealth in a time and even in the same situation where there are literally people sleeping on the streets or dying in the streets. And these people have to walk over them, and they're still coming out of their roles. They're still stepping live. Well, I guess that'd be, in their 40s, in the 40s and 50s, if they're stepping out of a Rolls Royce. Let's say their carriage or, whatever, their palanquin. Maybe they were
Yeah,
carried.
you can go in the 30s.
Yeah.
In the 30s when there's that story of the rich guy stepping out of his limousine and going into a fancy restaurant, and the guy laying on the side of the curb reaches up to him and says, "Brother, can you spare a dime?" You know, and we get that whole that the song. not only the song but the notion. You know, that you are in a situation where you have to say to someone, brother, can you spare a dime? You know, so many of them are, at that time especially, were ex-veterans from World War One. And again, we see that when we talk about the veterans from, say, Vietnam, or when we see these guys out there on the street from as late as Syria. You know, there's something about that really disturbs me.
If you build a culture that glorifies war and then don't glorify your fallen soldiers in their life after it, I mean, first, the war culture, I think, is, it's not the one I
Insane.
would choose. It's not constructive, but gosh, at least be consistent. At least,
Mm, take care of them.
yeah. Yeah, it's that simple.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I don't know. I've not personally experienced this first topic, but uh, being in a
And
nursing home
Cuomo?
during COVID-19
Yeah,
can't be easy.
no,
You don't get to
no.
see your family or your friends, and maybe like you don't remember them, or maybe you're having health issues, and even so, you're barely allowed to see your family or your friends.
Yeah, well, one of the crimes during this pandemic in New York was that they used nursing homes as a place to store people. They transferred people to the nursing homes, you know, and the big problem that's emerging right now is that they didn't count the number of those people who were dying because they were in nursing homes. You know, Governor Cuomo underreported by at least 50% the number of deaths that were occurring in New York nursing homes. And this is not just conjecture. His chief of staff has copped to it. It's terrible. One is it's terrible, of course, that we have such a stupid infrastructure. It's terrible, of course, that we have absolutely no healthcare system that's workable for a pandemic, or workable for poor people, or workable for minority people, or workable for old people. We have a health system that's workable only for rich people and fairly well off middle class people. You know, and Cuomo, this guy to me is an example, a real example of all the things that are wrong with our political system at this time. If you recall, we talked about last week about that one politician who told the other to blame the other guy. You know, if you ever got into trouble for doing something wrong, blame the other
Yeah,
guy.
but you only get one of those. You get to do that once, and
Well,
then
not in Cuomo's
second
case.
time, write another letter.
Yeah, yeah. Everything that happened in terms of all these deaths and whatnot, he was blaming Trump. The first person, the first excuse, the first word out of his mouth was always Trump. And because of that, if you recall, because he was such an ardent critic of Trump, people in the Democratic Party tried to run him for president of the United States.
Once again, proving that's what they consider vision. That someone had that idea, and a lot of people thought that was visionary. They're like, "Wow, that is just top shelf. That is perfect. Run Cuomo."
Cuomo wrote a book about himself at that time
Like,
that talks
wh-
about
why not?
leadership. You know,
Why not?
he talks about leadership during a time when he was obviously lying about the results of his own leadership. I mean, this is what passes, you understand, for politics. You know, this is the reality of our politics. You know, Cuomo is not that much of an aberration. He's just a more successful one. You know, but that's our politics. That's the nature of politics today. You know, write a letter. You know,
Hmm.
blame the other guy. Then, if it's your turn, write another letter. You know, or in this case, write a book. You know, but they were actually going to run this guy for president of the United States, and now you take a look at what was happening in the background. What was happening to the leadership that he was proclaiming, to the leader he was proclaiming to be?
And of course, if you looked
This
an
isn't
inch
a
under the
reality.
surface, you could have seen that at any other time. When no one wanted to, no one's like, all right,
Oh,
blinders,
yeah.
blinders.
There were
He's
people who
being
talked
tough
about it.
against Trump. He's giving press
Yeah.
conferences every day,
Right.
looking
Right.
angry and confident. And so
Th-
that's all we really need in a leader, right?
there were people who were talking about this, and they got cut off. And that's another thing for us to understand. You know, we're not cutting people off because they're exciting. We're cutting people off because they're telling something different from what we consider to be the narrative we want told. You know, there are people who told us about Cuomo, and we cut those people off, just as Facebook is doing today, just as Twitter is doing today, just such as newspapers themselves are doing today whenever anybody has a critical disagreement with any of the narratives. They cut you off. And this is what they did. I can remember it happening that somebody would say something and I read it and then I look around and it's gone. It's removed. You know, I saw it.
And so it gets back to this era of post-truth. How do you know what is real? Because you could have been the most adroit analyst at that time and seen both and still said, I have no idea which to believe. They both seem like decent cases. So in this whole, I call it the post-truth era, but like what, like how do you know? I know you speak of
Yeah,
seeing the Pravda and Pravda, seeing the truth
yeah,
in
I do.
in
I do.
propaganda,
Yeah,
but I
look,
don't think
if they didn't
we're
think,
there. I don't think that's how our
no,
news
no, no,
does it.
no, no. We're not talking about. Oh, wait a minute now. That is how our news does it. It's not how our people read the news. You know, absolutely. We have a prescribed official narrative that is repeated and repeated and repeated, not only by all the newspapers but all the pundits,
Yes,
by
I
all the
just argue
so-called.
that it's not necessarily. It's not the truth isn't necessarily placed within that narrative
No,
in a way that is
no,
easily
no.
appendable.
But a lot of look in so many cases. Come on now, we know the truth. You know, if somebody would make a nebulous argument against that truth, we will act as if that has value because we don't want to deal or accept or necessarily permit the country to understand its own truth. You know, when a cop shoots a kid in the back who's unarmed, there's no argument.
No.
We know the truth. When a cop shoots a kid laying on the ground 17 times, I'm just using the example of the cops because I'm using the example of what is obvious. We know the truth. We know that that is murder. When a cop puts his knee in the neck of a guy and he says he can't breathe and he dies, don't tell me we don't know the truth. We know the truth. It's murder. But whether or not we will cop to that truth And we will raise these nebulous arguments that have nothing to do with reality. The cop was threatened by this guy laying on the ground. The cops were threatened by this guy they were beating with the baton. You know, they thought this guy had a gun instead of a cell phone. We take those arguments and use those arguments as if they had some real weight. We use those arguments in the grand jury of Taylor that was so ridiculous. You know, and we took those arguments as if they had some basis in fact. But any of us with common sense knows better. Now, what are we willing to admit to? What are we willing to cop to? What are we willing to face? What are we willing to see us as being? That's where we have the problem. To see the problem and problem, you had to be searching for your realness, for the real thing. But if you don't want the real thing, then you don't search for the pravda and pravda. You take the nebulous explanation that they give you, or rationalization.
Well, yeah, I would agree. But my issue is now it's almost prescribed that you start looking for that truth. You have these three things that have this veneer of truth that seem almost true, and depending which rabbit hole you go down, you get, connected to a whole bunch of other untruth that's connected to the narrative that of the proverbial rabbit hole which you went down in the first place.
They make it sound that way. They make it complicated like that. But 9 times out of 10, the truth isn't that elusive. I mean, we we tend to know better, But what we tend also to do is to doubt ourselves, especially in facing authority. You know, we talk about ourselves as being the rugged individualist and the pioneer, the person who had all this confidence as he goes across the frontier. But we're not that at all. We are doubting ourselves at every turn. You know, we don't believe what we believe. We question who we are. You know, we have to gain this strength again if we had it before, and I think we did, of recognizing that we have in us an ability to see and think and rationalize and know the truth ourselves in the face of authority, such that we can stand up to the authority and face them head on. Because if we don't, they are going to destroy us.
I unfortunately think the truth is more elusive than that. And
okay.
I think for instance, like when you were speaking of the police shootings, yes, that is obvious. Things you can directly see, absolutely. But when it comes to motivations and machinations and the overall grand scheme of things, I think that in particular is obscured. That's not an easy thing to decipher.
No. The other thing about truth is there's things we won't know. I don't know your motivation. I can't stand before the president or the ex-president or whatnot and say you incited this because you wanted to do this. I don't know his motivation. I don't expect to know that truth. I'm asking the wrong question if I'm trying to figure out inside you what caused you to do that. Unless you're willing to tell me, unless you're willing to know yourself, unless you're willing to share. But the fact of the matter is, one of the truths is that we cannot know everything. And we have to have wisdom enough to know which things we can know and which things we have to let go of. Not necessarily let go of, because we can mull them around or they might become important to keep in mind. But we don't know them. There's things that we are not capable of knowing. We don't really know uh, 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 a lot of things about the so-called universe, and we teach it over and over again. It was from helioscopic to heliocentric to helioscopic to, and I went all those ways because the Romans thought that we were on a round planet and that the
Oh, and
sun did
the
rise.
Egyptians certainly, and some of the
Yeah,
ancient
yeah,
astronomers certainly knew it.
right, right. But those are observable truths. But they got distorted for one thing, for example, because of religion. Because it was religiously important to keep us at the center of the universe. Consequently, we would deny what our observations are. But we knew. The reason the question remained out there is because we knew. The reason they had to respond so violently to people who said otherwise is because we knew. You know, we knew there was a China when the United States kept telling us there wasn't. That China was Taiwan. You know, we knew there was a China. You know, there's things that we don't cop to knowing. That's all I'm getting at. And I'm also saying at the same time, yeah, there's some things we don't know, and there's some things we can't know.
Yeah, like I think it's a fun intellectual exercise to try to figure out where the COVID virus came from, but you're almost certainly never going to know. And does it matter? Is there anything that you could have done about it regardless?
No,
No.
but here's the problem. Here's the problem with that. Is that if we don't know what our politics is, if we don't know that we will blame somebody for something that is really stupid to blame them for,
The China virus, for
if we
instance?
don't, the China virus, for example, you know, we act as though we don't know that all of these kinds of laboratories around the world that create these kinds of vaccines, et cetera, that deals with these kinds of viruses, et cetera, that they all have certain certifications that they must meet. There's certain standards that they must meet, and that they have to meet those standards. The viruses don't just walk out the front door. And if we are going to confess to the point that this is a operating scientific viable laboratory, then for political reasons we're not going to make the statements that we make. You know, we have to recognize that all of us who operate out of those kinds of facilities practice the same standards. But we will pretend that the people in Russia don't, or we will pretend that the people in China don't, and we know better. You know, I'm talking about those who tell us differently,
And
who tell us,
if we go as far as to say, oh, they were being careless or they weren't following protocols, then just as easily we could be careless and not following protocols as well, because I'm sure that happens
but you got,
sometimes.
yeah, but not unfortunately in those labs that you can't make that statement. You know,
Well, and you can't
they
do
got
it.
they
Like
got redundant systems.
you can't
I
mess
mean,
with
right, the
pathogens.
redundancy is so great that it's hard to make. It's really almost impossible to make that kind of mistake. You know, uh, those systems are and they're worldwide. I mean, it's not like you have a different system in Russia than you got in the United States. They're the same systems and the same redundancies and the same procedures. You know, uh, it's all the same. And people around the world are just as smart and just as intelligent and just as scientific and just as capable as we are in America, despite the fact that we will tell you that they're dumber than we are, or they can't do this like we can, or whatever it is. But we, human beings, we know better. We know that every human being is just as smart.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you only really have to meet someone from somewhere else for 5 minutes to realize that everywhere there are smart people and everywhere there are idiots. And everywhere there are great athletes and everywhere there are couch potatoes and everywhere there's a gamut. Everywhere there's a spectrum. And if you only ever live in your cocoon, you do yourself a disservice. It feels like we've been in
And
a
we
cocoon here for COVID, at least. For one, I'm ready to
we
burst
create
out of it in a safe way.
we create. You know, one of the biggest problems we have is us. You know, we create. Look, we have the World Health Organization,
Who?
and it was established for a reason. The World Health Organization. It was established for a reason.
Who?
You know, it was established to do
Sorry.
certain things.
I'm
But
sorry.
we
No,
can
it took you a minute. I had to.
we can imperialistically decide who is. You know, uh, we can all of a sudden decide that the World Health Organization is run by the Chinese. You know,
It's, if anything,
I
a
mean,
U.S. offshoot, right? It's primarily a U.S.
right,
body.
right. You know, and all of a sudden it's run by the Chinese, and that kind of BS is repeated by the Washington Post and the New York Times and all these so-called credible news sources, but we don't call it fake news. You understand? All of a sudden, when the WHO goes to China to try to determine the origin of this virus, and they come back with their report, all of a sudden they can't be trusted because they didn't come back with the report that we wanted to hear. You know, our imperialistic arrogance is what stands in the way of truth.
But also,
And the
just look at how
people who
badly we're
lose to that
doing.
is us.
Look how badly we're
We
doing
lose,
with
like I said,
COVID-19,
I-
and
the
how
people
dare
who
we
lose
have
to it is
any
us.
expert opinion on it, saying this
Keep
is how
going.
you should do it. This is the way it should be
Hey.
handled. Listen to us. How arrogant in the face of opposite truth is that?
Hey, here's one. If we say, like, who has been successful in fighting this COVID, and what did they do different? Maybe I should take a look there to learn something about healthcare and healthcare in the community. You know, maybe I should, for example, go to Cuba. To Cuba, a little island that's sending people out all over the world to assist them in setting up healthcare systems. Maybe I should take a look at what they are doing. What did they do? They organized not from the top down, but from the bottom up. And that's the most important thing I can tell you about their healthcare system. It starts with the little guy in the community who knows the guy next door. When the COVID virus started, they have these little clinics, you understand, in all these communities, and they know these people, and we know who is vulnerable. And they sent medical staff around to all of these houses. They were proactive. They did not wait for the people to come to them. They sent medical staff to all these houses and tested all these people. You understand? And those who needed, they took out of that house and put into a situation where they could be treated. From the bottom up, they treated their citizens. And they had 8 people die. They had 8 people die, you understand? Because they organized their emergency situations, they organized their healthcare situations, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. You know, we're doing our organization from the top down, and all of a sudden now we're trying to find places where we could give people shots, jabs, we call them. We're just now opening up baseball stadiums or whatever it is. Just now we're looking for whether or not we should go to CVS or something. Just now we're considering how are we going to give these vaccines.
You ask people in communities who actually live there 6 months ago to have a plan for you, they'd have it in 2 days, and they would point out the spots that were good. And if you actually talk to people and they said, oh, the farm show would be a great place, and just bring people in and do it in a clean way. Oh, we have this place on City Island. It's a large area where you could set up different tents and facilities. You could do all these things. It could happen in a month. This area could be vaccinated in a month.
And we have this little church that sits in the middle of this Hispanic community. Or this little church right here on Market Street, where a lot of people around here will not have access to the farm show. We also have that, you understand, if we plan from the bottom up, you know, Rock Church could become important.
And
You know,
for instance,
the
you speak about the
YMCA could
Hispanic
become
church.
important.
Like, that's a lot of people may not feel comfortable going to a place where they don't know if there will be people who speak Spanish.
Absolutely.
And they know they go to the Hispanic church, they'll find a situation who will understand them and explain what's happening and be able to like give them some kind of comfort. But they got to go somewhere else. They got to go to CVS. Who knows? I mean, probably CVS is fine, but
First, they got to get the word.
yep.
You know, but the point, of course, is that we keep coming and we should keep coming back. Is that it's a basic understanding of how best to organize and plan for an emergency. And our conclusion is that it's better to organize from the bottom up than from the top down. And we have example here in America where top-down planning is not working, and it's obviously not working. And every day there's another failure, and every day there's a shortage, and every day there's people who go home disappointed. Our planning has not worked. And top-down planning for the emergency does not work. In England, they did a decent job of giving out these vaccines. They're doing a decent job. Why? Because they had a national health care structure already. As purely as it had become in the last few years, because it was influenced by us, to be honest about it. As poor as that healthcare system had become, the fact that there was a healthcare system organized within the communities is which allows England to do a decent job of jabbing people. New Zealand. What happened in New Zealand? They defeated this thing. Why? Because they have neighborhood clinics. The woman who runs that country is a doggone socialist. They start at their neighborhood with neighborhood clinics, and they rise that to national resolve. You know,
And not to get sidetracked, and I do like Jacinda Ardern, I believe that's her name. She hasn't been very supportive of workers or immigrants lately, but we can get into that. I was gonna have it as a story today, but didn't get around to it. But no, I think she did great on the COVID, and
yeah.
I think their response was fantastic. And I think in general, she's done a lot of good things. But that's for another day. Regardless,
Don't forget the influences that are on her that she have to fight against.
undoubtedly.
And you know what they are. You know, the capitalistic West. They still think that they are white people who belong to the West.
Oh, and it's just a stop away in Australia. Look at Australia.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
haven't handled it very well either. Although, I mean, you look at the places that haven't handled it well, the U.S. and Brazil, especially Brazil comes up with this, call it machismo, but it's honestly an insult to the word, this boisterous fool of a man who threatens to box people if he disagrees with them, and just sort of avoided any sort of, organic solution. And it comes back to the idea that in the situation, these large spread top down, especially corporate based solutions, in the US it was set up especially so that big US drug makers would benefit financially.
We make a buck. And how do you make a buck? By having a short supply. You know, that's one thing. You know, if people don't realize what's happening, you know, they negotiate these prices in secret. Why? You know, why is it that Italy wouldn't tell us what they had to pay for the new drugs that they got, which they paid twice as much for? why won't Biden tell us what he's paying for the new, what is it, 100 million or whatever that he's ordering? Not that we have, but that he's ordering. You know,
Who knew you'd have to order them? Would they just come?
hey, you know something? When this thing started, we all had an understanding of the nature of this thing. We all had an understanding of there's going to have to be a lot of vaccine if you're going to vaccinate all these people. I mean, that's not too hard to figure out. That we're going to vaccinate 300 million people, we need a lot of vaccine. You know, but they all of a sudden are realizing that they need to put their production up. You know, Pfizer is saying that it can produce 50% more than what they're producing because they have to, perhaps they can even double their production, but they have to open up the line. Open up the line? What were you waiting for? I'll tell you what you were waiting
Yeah.
for. The Price is Right. It's a game show.
It's a game show where no one wins.
Absolutely, not us. They
The
win.
bank wins. The
Yeah, right.
House
The
wins.
farm, the offshore accounts win. You know.
Yeah, and sorry, just unless you got more on this, just to speak on one of the other really screwed up things that's happening to the people who can handle it the least. The what's the word I'm thinking of? I don't know. But the global South, the International Monetary
yeah.
Fund, is
Yeah.
pressuring those countries
absolutely.
to cut oil subsidies in the name of fighting COVID. And this is the idea that somehow they're responsible for, global warming and pollution, but also it's their responsibility to fight COVID for the North, who's doing so interestingly so much worse than so many countries in the global South. Look at Vietnam. Vietnam's killing it. If you want to call them the global South, even, but like they're doing great.
Yeah. But I don't understand what's the relationship between oil subsidies and fighting COVID. I mean, oil subsidies are what you give to people so that they can be able to afford oil, right? Or is it that you give to companies so they can afford to explore for oil, right? Or is it what? I mean, what are these subsidies that we're talking about, and why
It's
cut it?
it's the form where oh man, that's a good question. Sorry. No, it is. It's not the form where you gift to oil companies to go searching for oil. It's that countries receive to keep oil and gas prices down
To keep them
in their
down?
countries,
Okay,
to keep
right.
it for a
Okay,
reasonable rate for their people.
okay. So why would removing those subsidies improve the fight for against COVID? I mean, I don't understand. I'm
Oh,
really
just
at a
so you
loss.
know, the global north has all the money that they provided in those subsidies to better fight COVID, I
Oh,
guess.
I
Yeah.
see. Oh, I got you. They could take that money and use that money to fight COVID. Ah, they
No,
spend
that
money
because
on the
that's exactly what they're going to do.
fight.
We
Oh,
promise.
I see.
We
I
promise.
see. Okay. Then maybe like some of the things that we do, like what we do, for example, in Venezuela and Bolivia and things, places like that, and people who we deliberately try to make sure they don't even get access to the vaccines. I mean, when we're using COVID and weaponize it against our South American neighbors. Uh, we're crying out both sides of our mouths, and the IMF is, I think, one of the worst inventions ever. You know, it's used to put countries into desperate debt. You know, and then to force on those people programs that take away any resources that they would use for their people. for housing, for subsidies, for paying public workers, and make you repay that money to the IMF. You know,
They're an
and
instrument of austerity.
they are an instrument of Western and global strategy.
Graeber
That's what
called
they're
them
instrument of.
the strong arm enforcer of the international monetary community.
Well, they remind me basically of the mafia. See, you know, it's like if you really, really got desperate and you had to go borrow money from the mafia, you know, the cost of processing that is very high. It might be an arm and a leg. You know.
Oh, that's where that comes from? Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense
Yeah.
now.
Right on. Yeah. You're just processing debt. Yeah. Yeah. It's a part of our we where we pretend that we are giving people humanitarian aid when what we're actually doing is giving them a capitalist trap. We do it to our people here all the time. You know, you go online or whatever it is to get something, and it turns out to be something else, and they keep charging you anyway. So it's
Yep,
nothing new to America.
accurate. So, when you were saying Iran, you were saying the revelation that the U.S. wasn't involved in the assassination of the general and that it was all Israel's doing. That Israel had put the hit on
Yeah.
had obviously put the hit on the
Oh,
general in charge of supposedly in charge of Iran's nuclear program.
mm. He was the general who was going to bring peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran, you know, and Iraq, you know. But what I'm referring to right now is because I'm taking a careful look in the early part of this administration at Joe Biden. You know, they the United States, even before Iran, the United States is under Joe Biden appealing the extradition decision of the British court. You know, that woman, I can't remember the judge, her name escapes me at the moment, barrister, sounds like barrister, you know, but she decided that he should not be extradited because of health reasons. Now that she didn't decide on the basis of all overriding issues in here, you know, of what journalism is and what it means to tell the truth and what it means to have a political prisoner and what it means to kill a man over a long period of torture. You know, none of these issues were involved. But Joe Biden has decided that we're going to extradite him, which means that we're going to put him in jail for 175 years for telling the truth about what we were doing. Joe Biden is doing nothing different than what Donald Trump had done and would be doing. And that's the thing that's concerning me right now. Iran, you know, Joe Biden was asked by that reporter from CBS, Nora, whatever her name is, Nora. Uh, she asked him in an interview, in her interview with him, you know, big important exclusive interview, you know, because he promised us when he was running that he was going to get back on with the agreement that we had with Iran and 5 other countries that we walked away from. And he was a part of making that agreement uh, because it happened during the Obama administration. But we have to recognize, and we should recognize, that Obama made the agreement but did nothing to fulfill it. He didn't remove sanctions, etc., that that agreement called for. Joe Biden said in that interview that he would not move on remaking that agreement with Iran until Iran agreed to stop doing this and stop doing that and stop doing that and abide by the agreement. You know, this is insanity. We walked away from an agreement, but we hold it on you to fulfill that agreement before we will come back. You know, he's talking nonsense. And it's time for us to talk about truth. You know, who in us cannot recognize the truth of telling us one thing and then doing something else? You know, how much evidence do we need to understand who this individual is and what his character is all about? When he tells us he's going to do one thing and then he does something else. It's not the
Well,
only.
it remains to be seen how Yemen's going to go in the peacekeeping efforts. That's one thing, I suppose. We'll also see how that turns out because he's taken a very strong stance on Saudi. He's taking a stance against Saudi Arabia, but
No,
I can't exactly understand it. You don't
no,
what? You don't
he
think
has
so?
not. No, he has not. Again, this is the nuanced lie. What did he say? We are temporarily ceasing
Was
to
it
sale our
temporary?
weapons. We are temporarily
Okay, I didn't
not
realize it was
selling
temporarily. Okay.
them the weapons. You know, we are for this short period of time going to just act like we're standing up for something. But did we make a statement in that process of saying that against what Saudi Arabia was doing? Did we even mention Yemen in that statement?
Yeah, you did, but
What?
he
What
said
did he
like
mention?
in their use, we no longer support Saudi Arabia in their efforts against Yemen. Correct?
Is that correct?
I thought so. Did I
By
hear that wrong?
temporarily suspending arms. That's not an absolute statement. You know, by temporarily suspending arms, we are not supporting. What does that say? We're not supporting. What? That's a declarative sentence that should stand on its own.
And it would have been the time to make a strong statement had he wanted to make one.
Yes, right. But what I'm saying about Joe Biden is that he pretends to make these statements and he pretends to be doing something big. And when you really start to examine what it is he's doing, it's no different from what we've been doing all along. Russia is another example of that. You know, he has commenced operations in the Black Sea, and he's doing naval operations with Ukraine. You know, he's making overtures in Lithuania to ensure that NATO is on the Russian border. And he's bad talking, you know, Russia and Putin and pretending, for example, just talk for 1 minute, just one brief minute about this guy. What's his name? Navalny or Navalny or whatever. You know, this so-called
Oh,
opposition.
Navalny, yeah.
You know, Navalny, the so-called opposition figure. You know how much of an opposition figure this guy is? 4%. That's what he got. 4%. You know. Do you know how what a anti-immigration this guy is? Just read his stuff. Do you understand what a racist this guy is? Just take a look at his videos. You know, this guy is worse than Guido. This is our man in Russia. We sure know
Okay.
how to
Well, I
pick 'em,
mean,
bro.
if all that's the case, it would not surprise me if that were our man in Russia. How you were talking about us supporting Papa Doc and Baby Doc in Haiti. We've got to go around the
Well,
world and see the people who we
well,
supported before. So, would we oppose someone just
listen.
because we support someone just because we oppose the person who they oppose? No, we wouldn't hesitate to do that. We do it all the time. And I don't know. I do hear numbers like that, 4%. And I don't know. They say the elections weren't as open as you might like. And Perhaps I don't know Russian elections. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe Putin
Okay,
has his huge.
let's
He has
look.
a lot of power
Look,
there,
Putin has
man.
he has a lot of people who love him because of what happened. If people really want to take a look at what Putin's history and what he did for Russia, you got to go out to the last drunk that was running Russia on behalf of the United States, and that's what he did. He reasserted that Russia is Russia. You know, Putin has not threatened us or harmed us. I have no reason to think that his election over there is any more corrupt than our elections over here. You know, and I say take a look in the mirror before you start talking about somebody else. Remove the log from your own eye before you talk about the splinter in the other guy's eye. We have no leg to stand on when we talk about elections to the world. Listen to what the European Union decided that it's going to put some new sanctions on Russia because of this so-called poisoning. This guy was supposed to be poisoned on an airplane that the Russians had a special landing, took him to a special hospital and saved his life. But they're trying to kill him. They're trying to poison him with a poison that it takes one drop to a swimming pool, but they can't kill him. They had him in the hospital in a coma, but they can't kill him. You understand? I'm talking about common sense. Somebody is lying. And it's not the person who was telling me that you tried to kill somebody when you had him in a coma and could have just let him die. Go to the European Union. Go to the fact that they stood up and they said just yesterday, day before yesterday, that we are going to put new sanctions on Russia. And go to the Irish woman, her last name is Daly, who spoke before the UN. And everything I said to you about the 4%, about the anti-immigrant, about the racists, she said and repeated. And I saw, particularly that last video that he put out. He is a racist, you know, especially with respect to Muslims. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's just not a huge surprising. It's not a huge surprise, unfortunately.
no, but that's not my point even.
No.
You know, my point is that I was raised with an understanding that it was more important to talk to your enemies than to talk to your friends.
Yeah,
And
but
the
it's a
fact
lot
that we
harder.
don't want,
You can talk to your friends
well,
whenever.
but it's much more important. You know, it's much more important to talk to your enemies. We don't want to talk to people, and we get mad at people for talking to people. The European Union is mad because their foreign advisor went and talked to Putin, and they say he shouldn't have talked to Putin. You know, Russia has gotten to the point where Lavrov, and I have a lot of respect for Lavrov. He said the other day that Russia is a independent military power. That Russia doesn't depend on anybody in terms of its military capability of defending itself. And that's what Russia needs to be economically, an independent power. And the heck with Europe and the heck with the United States because they're sick and tired of it. And let me tell you something, when the Russians get tired of it, and the Chinese get tired of it, and the Venezuelans get tired of it, et cetera, around the world, you know, this imperialistic system is dead. Now you can
Well, this
keep going this
imperialistic
way if you
system is
want to.
dead unless we want to admit it or not. It's in its dying heaves, and it seems like that's why we're experiencing its death throes just all over the place. The most bare and obvious and brutal signs of it that were always there, but now they are out in the open because it doesn't matter. And I think the question is if it's going to birth a new world of something better and humane or some totalitarian hellscape. I vote for the first if I have a choice in that, but it could easily be the second.
Yeah, okay. And where do we go from there? You know, when we lose our position that we are really making a lot of trouble about losing. Because I hear some of the positions that we're taking around the world today as being frantic. I hear that we don't cooperate with the World Court. I hear that we don't even want to have anything to do with who. That we think that the United Nations is a farce. You know, I hear these things about,
No, the United Nations is only as legitimate as the nations who give it legitimacy. It has nothing to do with the organization itself, and it's also structurally weak. It's no form of any way legitimate world government, which I know all the revelation prognosticators say, oh, the one world government, the coming of the apocalypse and all. I feel like you gotta detach yourself from that and realize all the ways in which some sort of, I don't know, international system of coherent governance would really benefit everybody. But that's just me.
yeah, but structurally, you understand why the United Nations is not a world power, why United Nations cannot make world decisions. It's because in the process of structuring the United Nations, we structured the Security Council. We structured in 5 people who would have the right to say no to anything and yes to anything. You know, we did everything that would preclude democracy by creating the Security Council. Just like we did everything to demonstrate that we didn't want democracy by creating the Senate, the old men.
Yeah. In a very unnecessary way in regards to the UN as well, just because if you are a great power, you don't need a veto. You just need the influence to make the countries who you want to do what you want to actually do it. And they will. Like you don't need a veto. Like you just need to exert the influence that you're going to exert anyway.
Yeah, persuasion.
Yeah.
Use your
Diplomacy.
Diplomacy.
Actual
Oh my
diplomacy.
God. What is that? What is that you're talking about?
But really, the Security Council shoots the great powers. We'll call them great powers. I kind of just threw up a little bit in my mouth when I said it, though. These great powers, it gives them issues anyway because you can get vetoed just as easily as anybody. Then nothing really ends up happening, and it really is hamstrung and powerless and pointless.
Right. You're right. But it's deliberately so. And that's my point. It was structured to be what it is. And we play a major, major, major role in the structuring. You understand? That was at our behest that there's a Security Council. Just like it's at our behest that there's an Electoral Council. I mean, and we were people who gave big donations to the United Nations with the expectation that we would get a return on it in terms of our domination. And
we have
the world is
manyfold.
and we have, but now so many of the underserved third world countries are coming to adulthood and recognizing, what had been going on and changing and banding together and making decisions that are separate from that of the people the countries that dominate,
And a colonized place is only going to stay colonized for so long, and it's only going to stay post-colonized for so long. It will grow up into its own nation and reclaim its sovereignty and its character. It will, just undoubtedly, unless you keep going back there and colonizing it. But at some point, the return, what is it? The more you do something, the less you get in return, whatever process that is. And increasingly, I mean, it's honestly never worth it. But you can see how people would think so, the fact that you can go in and mine a place for all its resources and then leave, but always comes back to haunt you.
Well, That which we do in the life of others will come back in the life of our own. Believe it. You know, we are, and this is something that we don't face. We talked about our debt a minute ago, and we talked about a country going bankrupt and bankrupting the lives of our grandkids. You know, we talked about those things being a precursor of the end of this hegemonic imperialistic rule, that we have. We talked about these things and what that indebtedness is going to do to us. But the fact of the matter is that we will not, in recognizing these things, make any changes. We will continue to bankrupt ourselves on our military. We will continue to bankrupt our moral structure on our military. We will begin to bankrupt the future viability physically of our youth by perpetual warfare. And all of these things, you don't talk about truth. Obviously, a ring of truth that is choking us. Now, what are we going to do about it? What is our so called leadership going to do about it? Our leadership is continuing to do what it's continued to do,
And to just
regardless
continue
of who has
the
been president.
analogy, you either slip the noose or you stay for the hanging.
Mm.
So it's
Yeah.
time to slip that noose.
Well, well, here we are at the precipice.
Oh, hey, you remember those? Remember a few weeks ago that I said we got to get some positive stories in here? I kind of got
Yeah,
one. You remember the Stansted 15, who in
yeah,
London blocked the what they call the Arrowway? I believe the Arrowway for
yeah.
the plane of deportees, so the plane could not take off.
The charter flight.
They, yeah, so they were. I think one or two of them had gone to jail, but they were facing terrorism charges on top of
Yeah,
everything else. And those were dropped in a ruling where the judge really said laughably, well, not that the judge was laughing, but the charges were laughable. The idea
hmm
that they was considered terroristic.
hmm Well, they were first charged with
Criminal
trespassing,
trespass, I think.
criminal trespassing. Okay,
Which,
and then
okay,
the
I
charges
mean,
were
yeah.
right.
Which they did. I mean, yeah, they were trespassing. Fine.
Okay, but then they took it to the out of the extremes of space or something. These people were domestic terrorists, basically, and bent on bringing harm to an airport or something like that. You know, that's and the judge said that what they did was in no way related to those charges.
Yeah,
You
of
know,
course it wasn't.
but that's we're going through that right now. I mean, because we're branding people domestic terrorists, and we're going to have to now prove in court that they were terrorists, not that they were rioters caught up in a riot, or even right wingers caught up in a right wing plot that they've been telling us about for years. I mean, we've been selling them guns and everything to do it with. You know,
I guess what
uh,
disturbs me is some of the rhetoric I've heard from people who I considered rather reasonable on the left saying if anyone supported any of the people protesting in Washington D.C. that day, they were Nazi sympathizers. Just flat out.
yeah,
I'm like, yo, no.
yeah.
No, I mean,
Well,
is that really where we have to take the tenor of the conversation immediately? Is that really where it has to be? Do we have to be so contentious and just, I don't know,
you know,
aggressive in that way? Is that where we are?
you had you had 77 million people or something like that vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
You know, so we are taking the position that 77 million people are deplorable. We are taking the position that 77 million people are domestic terrorists. We are taking the position that 77 million people who come to Washington to protest have no legitimate beefs, have no legitimate problems, but are only bent on overthrowing a democracy. Believing that in and of itself is anti democratic.
Yo, if 77 million people wanted to overthrow a democracy, they would have overthrown a democracy. They wouldn't have had a hard time. Heck, a million people could have done it, or less.
You know, we're not being democratic when we say we don't listen to the other guy. And even if that other guy constituted 3% or 8% or 12% or whatever, but 77 million is a big, big percentage. The First Amendment was set up to protect the minority, not to protect the majority vote. It was set up to protect the minority. And if we don't understand that and take a look at who this minority is and try to address their issues, then we don't understand what the First Amendment is about. Do people understand that the Constitution was written and that they were going to put that Constitution out, and then that the shopkeepers and the common folks protested that Constitution, and so they went back in there and created the amendments to that Constitution, including the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, including that which said that you can't be arrested for nothing, you had to face your accuser. If that was said you had to face what charges that you were being arrested for, you know, that those things were put into place because the common folks, that which would be the electorate, protested the Constitution that was written that they were going to drive in front of us and make the Constitution without
Man, it's
the amendments.
no new idea. It's no like, inspiration to take people in an unmarked van and put them in a black site and not let them testify and hold them for trial forever. That's nothing new. That's totalitarianism 101. That's been going on since forever. It's been going on since there were governments who wanted to control people. That's not some sort of new invention. It just has so happens that since we're in a country at least structured on rule of law and due process, that you do it and say, oh, this is a great new law enforcement tool. No, it's not new and it's not great. And truly, if you're just looking at results, I don't think it gets you any better results. It just gets you people who feel like for their own safety, they have to say something. And we've seen time and time again that testimony given under threat of torture or torture does not get true testimony. It just gets people saying things so you stop hurting them.
Yeah. Where we lose is on the principles. Yeah, we've lost the principles. You know, if you say free speech, if you say that everybody has a right to free speech, then you cannot say that somebody should be canceled for practicing free speech. You cannot say somebody is a Nazi. How about this woman at the Disney place, the Disney movie? You know, she said that the hate in this country is like a mechanism that the Nazis used. You know, and first of all, I mean, it's absolutely true. You know, hate is an instrument that can be used, to create fascism. And actually, what she said in that sense was a warning. But Disney fired her for using the term Nazi and applying it to what we're doing in this country. You know, just again, I mean, the First Amendment. I mean, even we're not even going to consider the fact that what she said is true. But the fact that she said it, you fire her. First Amendment. You know, we don't practice the First Amendment. We had 10 at least Democrats that they showed us Since that time, even AOC has showed us since that time who has used that same analogy, and they were never fired. So it's a question of where you come from in this society when you say those things. In the impeachment hearing right now, you know, they're using the word fight. They say that Donald Trump incited those people because he told them to fight. Well, I don't know, but the fact is that they were able to show us how many Democrat after Democrat after Democrat, using those same words to inspire their people. You know, and the fact is that it's a question of what side it comes from. Yeah, whether or not we hear it or not, whether or not we negate it or not, whether or not we take them off of Facebook or not. Uh, it's a question of what side they're coming from, not even a question of what they say. You know, this is a takeover of a very special kind of takeover, and we better be very, very careful
Yeah. So
because we're
I don't, whereas I think, whereas I don't agree with Disney firing her for what she said, I don't think that was necessary. Although, private company, I suppose they can do what they want. It really, the quote isn't. I don't know. See, when I read it, it came off to me in a way, at least the way I read it, in that she was saying that she was comparing the hate against, I guess, conservatives, you'd say, or specifically the alt right,
yeah,
about similar to the persecution of the Jews before the Holocaust, which I don't. That's, I mean, of course, persecution of Jewish people has existed since there's been Jewish people, and there's been like a long and rich history of it, and I don't think you can ignore that in the context of the question either. So to compare the hate against current day alt right conservatives to that degree of hate and vitriol and eventual extermination, I think that's I think that's just off. I think there's a long, long,
yeah,
long way to go.
yeah. There's a long way to go, but I'm saying that the process. I'm saying she's right about the process. Yes, it's a long way to go, but beware of process. You know, and there's a lot of things that people say that have aspects of things in it that are. I mean, we talk about the Jews, for example. I hate to talk about that because I can't have a good outcome. You know, because people think I'm rationalizing or something or another,
No, and
and
it's
that
the
I don't like
ultimate,
Jews
like,
or something.
ultimate end, because there's nothing you can compare it to. It was a genocide because it's such a big thing. Like, how
Yeah,
can you
yeah.
compare that to anything?
Well, you can compare it to a lot of genocides. You can compare it to genocidal slavery. I mean, you can compare it also, and this is the part that disturbs me, to the positions, not to the act that we took, the extremism, but to the same positions that we believed in the United States of America. We did not allow those Jews to immigrate from Germany to the United States with the threat of the concentration camp, and we did not allow them in this country. And we were just as anti Semitic in this country. We didn't go to those extremes, you understand, but we suffered the same illness, you know, and we still suffer the same illness with respect to other races, etc. And that process is what is happening over and over and over again. That process of hating, and you use the N word, people, uh, that process of using groups to hate against is a real part and parcel of the foulness of human history.
Yeah, and it can happen fast. It can go.
Oh
It
yeah,
is not. Is though I know I've seen things. It's a different topic. but I've seen statements that say, "Oh, evolution takes billions of years or millions of years," and sure, but sometimes it takes 1 year. These changes happen over short periods of time sometimes, and I
Oh
don't,
yeah.
especially when you're talking about the evolution of ideas and concepts. They say, 1,000 years of history can happen in a month, or you know, 1,000 years
Yeah.
or a month can seem like, you know what I'm saying. Regardless,
Yeah.
these
I do. Yeah.
periods of time,
Yeah.
they're not all the same. Some years, like I think 2020 and perhaps onward, were like catalyst years, like the transformative years, like the, I don't know. There's a word for it, but regardless,
No, there is. 1968 was one of those years. Yeah, a major one. I don't know how old were you in 1968, but
negative
what
13,
a year. 13. You
negative
won't
13.
appreciate what a year that was. you know, all the love that was going on in the streets and protests against the war and people being assassinated and all the rest of that. It was a transformative year. But then they fought back. I mean, that's after that you get the Powell Amendment and whatnot. You get the other side lining up to fight back. And they did a very successful job of fighting back.
No, that's
So
really what I unfortunately had to talk about on the show we do on Mondays, Teens Speak Out at 6 p.m. Eastern. That you can, it's great to score victories in pursuit of your cause. It's a great thing, and they are milestones, but there will always be a backlash, and there will always be people fighting back, and they don't stop either. The opposition to it never stops. And I mean, just speaking specifically on abortion, like that, like, 1972 Roe versus Wade. Okay, well, the question's closed. Of course it's not. Of course that's not all there is to say about it. And we see abortion restrictions in many states on the rise. I'm not sure about Pennsylvania. I don't think we have
no,
any. I don't think we have that really
no.
strict bill, but we have certainly
Mhm.
many fewer clinics where one can be done. The
Right,
number of places it's available
right,
are much fewer. I think like
right.
18 in the 80s to like five now, five across
Yeah,
the
yeah.
state
Right,
for a state of what,
right,
12 million people?
right. Yeah. Topeka, Kansas decision, Board of Education, Brown decision about school desegregation. Basically, it turned out for all of America. And yet, when you look around today, America is more segregated, not less segregated. The schools themselves are more segregated, not less segregated. But my real qualm is how we keep talking about other countries around the world and how they treat mistreat minorities and all that kind of thing, and how inhuman China is, and how inhuman Russia is, and Venezuela and all that kind of thing, and yet we're more segregated than we've ever been. And it's the people. I'll say this. I don't. I hope I don't. It's not as true as it seems. It seems like it's the people on the left that have the most segregated environment. New York, Chicago, Philadelphia. These are the most segregated Los Angeles cities in our country. New York is segregated by race. New York is segregated by religion. New York is segregated by income, ethnicity, you know, ethnic. Uh,
I mean, perhaps, but then we look at regions that are just as segregated as any of those cities. I mean, certainly cities could be called liberal enclaves, and I think for good reason, but you have, I'm sure, entire regions around this state that are archly one group or another and very much of the same mindset, most likely, at least.
yeah. Well, the thing that I want to recognize, is that we're not talking about liberal bastions when we talk about New York and Philadelphia and so forth. When we go out and we complain about the racism in the South, we're not talking about New York and Chicago. It was Chicago. Well, look what happened in Cicero with Martin Luther King. You know, eh, uh, we don't we act as though the reality is that these places are liberal and everybody is okay and people are mixed up and integrated because you can go on the streets and see all kinds of people. But when they go home or when they go to church on Sunday, then you see what New York is about. You know, Sunday morning being probably the most segregated day
In
in the
America?
week in
Yeah.
America.
Yep.
You know, uh,
And just like back in the days of Sumer and Mesopotamia, the church is still a powerful, powerful entity in this country. It takes in a lot of money. It motivates a lot of people. It shows people what to do, how to think, how to feel. And so many of those churches are still spewing this divisive and just racist, exclusionary hate.
nonsense. Yeah. Well, it just bothers me that we talk about other countries that way and we don't take the log out of our own eye. You know, if we
I
were to
mean, what
recognize the position that we're in and what kind of work that we have left to do, that would be one thing. But for us to pretend that we are so doggone exceptional and all these other people are the ones with these problems, that just unravels me.
I mean, when we speak of the American Taliban, it's not tongue in cheek. I mean, you put pictures of dudes in the back of trucks with, AR-15s riding around in hunting gear, supporting their chosen political candidate, and in other situations too. That's not a uniquely non-American experience. That's in America
Well,
too.
how about this? When those same guys riding around in the back of the truck said that they're entitled to have an AR-15 in their home, how many of the so-called liberals vote for that bill? How many of them vote against the Second Amendment, so-called Second Amendment, the way they use it? It's not the Second Amendment. But how many people in this country, in the political system, stand up for America not killing America? You know, they don't stand up. You know, they can pretend all they want to that they are the liberal side of the room. But when they vote on taxes, money, and guns, they vote just like everybody else and war. You
Yeah,
know,
imperialism especially is what I was about to say. Like when the vote for imperialism comes up, or selling arms to Saudi Arabia, or supporting the war against Iraq back in the day, where do you think their votes are going to go? And you see it. You see it almost exclusively that the votes are for the status quo, for the power at hand, not even necessarily liberal or conservative, just for imperialism.
well, I don't hear anybody standing up for Julian Assange from any party. You know, I don't hear anyone standing up for peace with Iran from any party. I don't hear anyone saying that we should talk to the Russians and not be aggressive in the Black Sea or not send destroyers to the South China Sea from either party. You understand? It's not a question of black and white or orange and gray or Democrat and Republican. Not when they all agree on what is essential. I don't hear anybody standing up about the incredible, incredible disparity in wealth. I don't hear any of the liberal Democrats standing up for universal health care. I don't hear anybody standing up and saying what the problems were with this country with respect to this pandemic. The real problems, the ones that don't involve writing a letter and blaming the other guy. I don't hear you talk about truth. I don't hear any of those people facing the reality of the issues that we have to face. They make up stuff. Abortion. you know, these so-called what do you call those issues that you use?
The wedge issues, the
The wedge
ones where
issues.
you
Yeah,
can divert
yeah,
everyone's attention and energy so you can do whatever you want when people aren't watching as closely. Yeah, those. Yep,
yeah,
they're the
yeah,
ones.
yeah. They're the ones. Well,
But there comes a
okay.
time when your life gets on the line and is impacted to such a degree that you can no longer stand by and just watch. And I think this is what we are seeing in India. Remember, we started talking about this a few months ago, and they're
Yeah,
still going. There have
yeah,
been deaths. There have been several deaths,
yeah,
and there's obviously been other police brutality reactions in response to it. But the Indians, who are largely farmers and their supporters, who have seen the money they get for their crops dwindle and the cost of living skyrocket, not to mention any other number of issues, international seed companies, and heck, they can't even repair their tractors anymore because proprietary Western BS. But regardless, it's in response to the laws that the Modi government had passed to really introduce foreign investment and big foreign companies to grab a larger part of the Indian agricultural market and push these smaller farmers out. And these guys are starving, and the people down the line from them are starving, and they're actually facing death. So no, they're not going to stop. This isn't going to
no,
stop. Like, we're finally at the point there where we see these protests that are just going to be perpetual, and they can't
yeah, you
but
know,
call attention to it.
it's a very interesting protest. Yeah, if they say you got almost a billion people or something that these that's upset. I don't know how many people out there in the street, three-quarters of a million or something like that. But they're intense, and they have mobile museums, and they have libraries, and they have uh, clinics, and they have testing sites, and they have vaccine sites, and salons. You know, all of
It's
this
almost like
within
their own
their
little provisional government stepping
yeah,
in
right.
where
You
the
know,
Indian government isn't.
where the Indian government is absolutely correct. And let's talk about how drastic the situation has become because there's 28 farmers a day killing themselves. You know, they are at such desperate straits. And what happened here? You had a government that threw out democracy. You have a government that, without discussion, made these new laws. Without discussion of the people, without even informing the people, they made these new laws that favor big farm corporations, particularly from overseas, and those that control seeds,
Hmm.
to buy up the seeds. You understand? You know, the Monsantos of the world. You know, here you have a nation. You know, we're not 50 what, 55% or 52% of the people there are engaged in agriculture to feed
It's
a
a
billion
large
people.
percentage.
You know, and they've been feeding a billion people. And they've been proud of feeding a billion people. So it's not a question of capability. These corporations ain't going to do something for them that they haven't done for themselves. These corporations are only going to push them off the land and take the money.
Oh, and we
You
only
know,
need to look back a few hundred years to see where the British East India Company came in and just devastated
oh yeah,
the farming of the Indian
yeah,
people and caused millions to die of famine. So when we say that this has reverberations in history, this is what
yeah,
we're saying. Like, you don't have to look back far to see where foreign intervention in Indian agriculture and markets led to deaths, because they've been several of the largest famines in world history
yeah,
in India as a result of foreign corporate interference. And yeah, I guess
right.
you could say the British East India Company wasn't what we would consider foreign agriculture interference, but it was a large scale thing. If anything, it was
Maybe it was,
more.
sure.
Like, it was
Yeah,
no, it was strong. Like, it's not necessarily how we might see it. It wasn't this complicated market. It was like a monopolistic market. They just came in, set the rules, and skimmed off the top. When I say skimmed,
Yeah.
they chopped off the top for being
Right,
literal.
right, yeah. And the British, what is their position today? They're saying, "Oh, y'all should talk." you know that
Yeah. I know
who
my response would be y'all should
yeah,
shut up.
yeah. Y'all should talk. You know, you got 3/4 of a million farmers out in protest, and your response is, you're Mr. Johnson. Your response is, hey, y'all should. Why don't y'all sit down and talk?
Oh, wait, we're talking about Boris? I mean, you mean talking about
Yeah,
Boris?
Boris.
Yeah,
Yeah,
then he
Boris.
should then you should certainly shut up. Just whatever you're saying, it doesn't matter. Just please, I'm begging you. And yet their COVID
That guy.
response has been better than the U.S. So, huh?
It's
How about
only in
that?
terms of vaccination, but not necessarily in terms of how they treated their populations.
Hmm,
You know,
yeah.
and several other things. I mean, they had some real serious problems in Britain because in some ways they're so much like us.
Well,
But yeah,
we
they did
learned
a better
well.
job because they had a national health system that came out of World War II. Socialized medicine. That's what we kept calling it. Socialized medicine. If you sit down and have a planned, you know, medical Medicare infrastructure, then that's socialized medicine.
Wow.
My God.
Remember we were talking about 1948 and what a year it was for America? What if in 1948 that's what would have arisen? And we would have had that same nationalized healthcare system too. And I believe FDR was in favor of the idea,
You know who was Huey Long? Huey
who has
Long is the one
been
who pushed FDR.
demonized, who has been
Yes,
absolutely just eviscerated.
yes, yes, yes. But he gave that to people in Louisiana. He gave them schools. He gave them hospitals. He was a socialist. A socialist is one who builds for the people. Apparently, you know, you call him a socialist because he has education for free. You call him a socialist because he builds hospitals. You call him a socialist because he talked about universal health care. And because he's a socialist, you're allowed to assassinate him. And they tell me that Franklin Roosevelt was the person behind that assassination. That's what they say. That's what they say. He was afraid of the man running for president. That's what they say. There's
Huh. I never heard that.
Oh, you never heard that? Oh
Mm-mm.
yeah, there's quite a school of thought on that.
I'm not even
I'll tell you
saying
where.
that's
One place you run
ridiculous.
into that is in. Take a look at Untold History. Take a look at that rendition of Huey Long, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Okay, yeah. I stopped in the mid 19th century. I should probably continue on.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I think if I remember correctly, he's one of the people who makes the case for Roosevelt being behind that assassination. You know,
Yeah.
Roosevelt would have probably killed his own. He was the agricultural secretary, and then he became a real candidate because of the way that he treated the people. He was a socialist, and Roosevelt refused to run him. He ran Truman, for vice president. But if they could have killed him, they would have killed him too.
One of
They killed
the
everybody here.
truly fateful decisions of this country.
Yeah,
I mean, just
absolutely.
imagine had he been the presidential candidate. I know he ran in on a
Well,
separate
yeah, that was
party.
yeah, it's so different.
No,
Because
I know, and I
yeah,
know Debs ran as a socialist and actually did
uh,
pretty well.
oh yeah, he did pretty
Had
good.
that momentum been allowed to grow, who knows where we'd be?
Yeah, well, we put him in jail and killed himself. You know,
Okay, I
I
guess we
mean,
know where that would
basically,
be. Okay, in
yeah.
jail. Just done.
We didn't kill him while he was in jail, but we allowed him to do the Assange thing. I mean, we learned that one before. You know, you can have their health deteriorate so much that when they get out of jail, they die. Uh,
Oh, if it ain't
except that
broke.
we're going to allow Assange to die in jail. We're not going to be happy until the day he's dead, and then we'll uh, withdraw our appeal.
Oh man, then they'll throw a party for their backward thinking obstructionist buddies and say, "We did it. We stopped the free flow of information to the people. Hurrah, hurrah. Transparency is dead."
One thing I think about Donald Trump,
Yeah, I think
guy
about
that's
him
being
too.
impeached right now, is that he took that position on Julian Assange. But I don't think he took it as a position out of ideology. I don't think he had an ideology about it. I think he took it because it was just a so-called practical political thing to do.
Yeah.
It's not a position that would get you in trouble for taking. But Biden is taking that position out of ideology. You know,
Oh, he
Biden
was,
knows.
speaking of at least Snowden, even up to the election, he was going around making deals trying to get extradition for Snowden immediately. He's still on that
Yeah,
bent.
yeah,
Like he wants, and
yeah,
he is
yeah.
international law and order guy.
Well, he told us. You know what he said about Julian Assange? He said he was an electronic terrorist. Yeah.
First off, $20 if Joe Biden not even understands what an electric terrorist means. Electronic terrorist means $20
Mm.
if he actually does.
Well, the thing that disturbs me or concerns me is that they operate out of ideology and they know what it is they do. You know, Trump might have operated out of instinct and impulse, but he had no concerted effort in a particular direction to create a certain state. And I'm afraid that we're in that throes again, that we're in the process of creating a certain state. And if you listen carefully to the narrative, you know what that state would be and how limited it is in terms of human freedoms.
Yeah. It's not the state I would want to live in. Oh,
No.
wait, it is. It is.
Hmm.
Oh, well.
Yeah, well, I would never have moved to Mississippi.
So we're about reaching the end of it today.
Boy, there's a lot of stuff we didn't talk about.
No, I know. And I'd love to talk about food justice, but we can flesh that out over the week and
Yeah,
make
good.
it an even deeper dive. We could mostly also as well, we can talk about the India farmers again and similar movements because I think if food justice is unserved, especially in the face of climate change, like this is only going to get worse. It's a human right. Those who can have an obligation to provide everyone the means to do it themselves or to acquire it. And really, it's just about living in a world that isn't factory farms, that isn't just all animal husbandry and mass produced polluted vegetables that through their creation end up damaging the planet. This is about getting what we need from the earth without leaving a stain and even starting to heal it through the process and to live in harmony and balance with it. That's, to me at least, what food justice means, to feed everyone in the most compassionate way possible.
And not to have a tomato with fish genes in it. You know,
No, I don't need a
they
fish
say,
tomato in my life.
you know, yeah, yeah. But splicing genes into different things, I mean, I really worry about that one. Yeah.
I've seen too
And the
many
nebulous reasons, the terrible
sci-fi
reasons that
horror
they have.
movies that I am against the idea of splicing genes into tomatoes and plants. You've seen Little Shop of Horrors, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You see how that goes. That's as far as you need to look in
yeah,
terms of,
yeah.
not wanting to splice genes into plants. Sooner or later, you're going to
Yeah.
get eaten. That's just how it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's
on that
right.
scientific take, we're going to end it for today. Thank you for listening and for watching. For Bill Jameson, my name is Justin Geist. This has been Reach Out.
Peace, y'all.